Hello, everyone, and welcome to my status report 3. My name is Mitchell McDonough, and the internship that I've undertaken is with an archive called One Archives under the USC Libraries umbrella. And essentially, this is my last semester of the SJSU MLIS program. And before I graduated, I wanted to take on an internship that was archival focused. And I fell upon the One Archive internship through the SJSU internships page. And thought that the materials and the archive itself were quite fascinating and interesting. And local to where I live. I am from Los Angeles, born and raised, and worked at a museum as an archivist in Los Angeles itself for around 4 or 5 years. So yeah, a little bit about my experience and duties, roles, etc., learning outcomes of this internship I will be going through shortly. Before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about the archive itself and the holdings that they have, the kind of materials that they have. So the reason it is called One is because most of the materials are related or focused on the first homophile publication in the United States called One Magazine. And I work primarily with letters to the editor of this magazine. The magazine began in roughly around the 1950s, the early 1950s. So an interesting juxtaposition presents itself. As I mentioned before, One Magazine, the first homophile publication in the United States, and the archive itself is the largest collection of LGBTQ materials in the world. And yeah, the interesting juxtaposition being that people, subscribers of this magazine and anybody affiliated with this magazine, essentially worried about the legality of expressing their sexual orientation, gender orientation in traditional era of the United States in the 1950s and 60s, post World War II era. President Eisenhower is the president at the time. So quite an interesting juxtaposition there as, a minority of the United States at the time, and still to this day, the homosexual population of the United States trying to express themselves in a traditional era of the United States. So here I show the website to One Archives at the USC Libraries at one.usc.edu. And I'm just going to scroll down here to show this sentence here. So One National Gay and Lesbian Archives at the USC Libraries is the largest repository of LGBTQ materials in the world, as I had just mentioned. And before this archive was affiliated with USC Libraries, it was a standalone archive. And just recently, within the past couple of years, USC Libraries took One Archives under its wing, under its umbrella, and now everything that is described by myself and the One archivist, Lani Shibuyama, which is also my advisor or supervisor, if you will, all of those descriptions are uploaded onto the USC Digital Library for research purposes, and the collections are digitized and uploaded as well. So I wanted to just go quickly to the about page of USC Libraries in general, just to show the mission of the USC Libraries. USC Digital Library helps fulfill the mission of USC libraries to actively support the discovery, creation, and preservation of knowledge and develop collections and services that support and encourage the academic endeavors of faculty, students, and staff. Just like One Archives, there are many other archives and libraries that are minority focused, which kind of runs parallel with our competency as I'm currently writing my e-portfolio on inclusivity and equity and diversity of collections and in the archival field. So this is a great point of running that parallel between our competencies and in the field work, quote unquote. Anyhow, yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my advisor, Solani Shiguyama. Before, as a standalone archive, One Archive, she was the archivist at the time, and she has gone through this transformation from a standalone archive to an archive under the USC Libraries umbrella. So very exciting time for this archive. Yeah, so I want to go through some of the roles and duties that I have as an archival assistant at One Archive, the kinds of things that I do and the learning outcomes that I have created for myself, what I want to learn, essentially what I want to take away from this internship experience. So a few roles that I have. First of all, metadata extraction from digital files and metadata input on a Google Sheets file that I will show to you in just a few minutes here. The metadata input includes Library of Congress subject headings, subjects and corporate names, personal names, unrecognized keywords or slang, also inputting geographic locations, the creators and contributors who created the record or the material that's digitized, and were there any other contributors. So I work specifically with letters to the editor of One magazine from in the span of the 1950s to roughly around the 1970s. My second role, I have, so the first role is more of a formatted metadata input using LCSH, using Getty AAT resource. And then my second role is a bit of an unformatted description. I write a 1 to 2 sentence description of each collection, kind of just giving summarizing that particular record, what kinds of things are discussed in these letters to the editor. Are there responses? Are there notable or noteworthy things that are discussed? Things of that nature. And along with that, my last role here is that recently the One Archivist placed a priority on kind of seeking out notable and noteworthy archival materials that I may run across in regard to using them for the One Archive's social media initiative. So through looking these letters to the editor, they could be quite administrative focused. You know, people want to subscribe to the publication, or a lot of the times they ask, where is my magazine? I didn't receive it. So these kinds of administrative correspondences with the editors and between the editors and the subscribers of the magazine. But also there are actually quite a few diamonds in the rough. Many records that are very noteworthy, very notable, and in my opinion, worth looking at in regards to more research, or in regard to posting on social media. And so what I'll do now is I'll show the Google spreadsheet that I'm currently using to input metadata. So here we are, we have the Google spreadsheet that I collaborate with and between myself and the one archivist. And I'll go through each row here so I can give you a general understanding of the types of metadata that I'm inputting. I wanted to show everything first, just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that I am inputting here. But as you can see in B here, this is the unredacted name. So many of the subscribers, the creators of these letters to the editor, we have their unredacted name. The reason we have the unredacted name is for our own administrative records, for one archive's own administrative records. But as far as when we transfer these records to the USC Digital Library, we use the redacted name. And you'll see when I show these couple of examples that I have for you later. But we have the redacted name to ensure the privacy and the security and safety of the creator or the subscriber of these particular records, because at the many of these people are either grandparents or great grandparents, maybe even deceased, but we want to protect their name for obvious reasons here. So moving on to letter D. We have the title of the record. So we use the redacted name, as I mentioned before. Letter F, as I also mentioned before, this is the unformatted description area where I write a 1 to 2 sentence summarization of the record collection, types of things that are discussed in the various correspondences in letters to the editor. As you can see here, for example, Douglas M., a letter that he wrote in 1963. He's a doctor, and he writes an analysis into, I believe, an article called "What Makes a Homo." So kind of just his analysis as a doctor, describing his opinions on this particular article. One thing to note is that, as you see here, not everyone that wrote letters to the editor were homosexual. You see a huge influx of clergymen that write in support of one magazine. You have doctors, medical doctors, researchers, scholars that are searching for scholarly information about the psychology of the movement and the psychology of homosexuality. This is essentially the beginning of understanding homosexuality and a general understanding of homosexuality, I guess I could say. All right, so moving on, this is, as I mentioned, letter F is the unformatted section. The rest of the input, the metadata input that is input here is formatted using, as I mentioned before, the LCSH resource. So quickly, I'll just go to, on letter I, we have the subjects. So various subjects that are discussed in these records here. So the given subject in all of these records is gay press publications, because one magazine was a gay press publication and can go universally under all of these records. But as you can see, I've also included police corruption, homosexuality as a subject matter, fundraising, arrests, police methods. These are all found on the LCSH authorized terms here, as you can see. Moving on, we have corporate names. So much like the subject section, gay press publications is universal. Also, in the subject or corporate name, we have One Inc., the corporate name of one magazine. But also, if there are other homosexual publications that are discussed, or maybe there's assembly bills that are being passed that are in regards or related to the gay rights movement, then you will put like a corporate name. Here I have Drum Magazine, which is also another homosexual publication, gay press publication, the Giannis Society of America, various corporate names. Here you see Victorian Council of Churches. So here's a clergyman. We can look just briefly here. Alan M. Letters note. A reverend in Australia reveals being confronted with the homosexual situation while working with inner city migrant youth. Request a copy of One magazine in hopes to further knowledge and insight about homosexuality. So yeah, the demographic, as I mentioned before, is not strictly homosexual. As you see, there's clergymen and assemblymen, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, scholars, researchers of many different kinds that are just looking to gain knowledge on this movement. All right, so moving on to letter N, we have the subject or personal name. So here, instead of looking at the authorized terms, I would look for I'm going to look up a name that I use quite frequently because Evelyn Hooker wrote a report on homosexuality that was widely analyzed and discussed amongst the community. And so this personal name is found actually quite frequently as many people are discussing this report at large. James Barr is a homosexual fiction writer. So perhaps he wrote this book called Game of Fools. Various other personal names. And then this keyword here, Q, is only for slang or other keyword terms that cannot be found in the LCSH database. So this might be the name of an article or the name of a book that cannot be found on LCSH. I would write here. So as you see here, Game of Fools, Homosexuals Today, that's the way it goes. I believe that's a book name or an article name. The Hooker report here is Evelyn Caldwell Hooker's report that she wrote on homosexuality. And moving on here to letter T, U, V, W, these are all geographic subject location terms. So if we look just briefly here at this particular record, so we have Indianapolis, Indiana. So we would put, of course, geographic subject, city. So here we have, Cypress, for example. What county is Cypress in? Orange County. What state is Cypress? The city of Cypress in Orange County in California, and then the country of origin, USA. One thing to note is that here's an example. There are international letters that come in to as letters to the editor. So these records don't just originate in the United States. This was an international. There are many international creators that wrote to One magazine. So yeah, here you see the various cities and counties and states that these letters to the editor originated from. And I believe the One archivist mentioned that they're going to take part in some kind of project that organizes the records of origin. Where did they come from, and the various subscribers, where they came from, showing the international scope of the letters to the editor and the international impact of One magazine during this time period. So moving on here, we have creator and contributor. So the creator being who wrote the letter. And here you see the redacted name, rather, Richard W. M. M being the last name, Richard W. being first and middle, and this is the typical organization, how we organize these names. Yeah, so the unredacted names we do not want to show for the privacy and safety and security of that person and their family, etc. And then the contributor, most of the contributors are either editors themselves or circulation managers, publication managers of one magazine. So here, W. Dorleg, a very fascinating person, editor of the one magazine. William Lambert. William Lambert is also W. Dorleg. He used pseudonyms, and this is quite typical for the time period because they wanted to not expose themselves as homosexuals in public. And especially during this time, one magazine was under federal investigation in effort to thwart this movement. So yeah, that's just a little insight about pseudonyms and maintaining privacy of these people's names, the importance of that. Okay, so moving on, we have the date created section. So as you can see, I'll go back to this particular record. Indianapolis, Indiana. When was it written? September 30th in 1955. We tend to use this particular date as instead of the stamped date. Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. The various dates that these letters were created. And as you can see here, we have a specific strict organization of the dates, year first, then the month, and then the date, right? And then here you see, for example, in this row, we have 4 different letters in this record. Moving on to the format. So the format is essentially the medium of the document. What kind of document is it? What is the physical document? Is it a letter? Is it an order form? Is it a photograph? Is it a business card? And all of these various formats are found on the Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus. And as you can see here, I looked up photographs, so I'll just do a quick search of photographs. And as you can see, I could input advertising photographs. It's for advertising. Black and white photographs, which I've used before, color photographs, etc. So these are very, very specific if they want in this specific example. But most of the time, as you can see in the spreadsheet, and obviously they're letters to the editor. So letters, correspondence would be the correct format. Many of the times people are subscribing to the publication, so order forms would be suitable for this situation. Oftentimes people send in articles to the magazine, etc. Notes, documents, sometimes people send business cards. And the last metadata that we input here is the language. Most of these are in English. But there have been many French language letters, German language letters, etc. Italian, as you can see here. So again, just showing the international scope of one magazine and the gay rights movement in mass. So that's pretty much it in regards to the spreadsheet itself. Now I want to kind of show you a few interesting records that I have come across, and I'll also show you kind of how these notable or noteworthy records have been input into the spreadsheet. So here, as you can see, I showed you this letter earlier. So this letter is originating from Indianapolis, Indiana, Midwestern United States in 1955. And the writer writes in response to a shooting that took place in a park that many homosexuals gathered. There's not really a lot of information regarding the shooting, and the clipping is not attached to this particular record, but you can kind of lead on a hunch that maybe the police might have shot a homosexual or stuck up a homosexual due to their sexual gender orientations, etc. But as you can see here, they wanted to reveal the clandestine police efforts to thwart this particular homosexual hotspot in Indianapolis. So they talk about a policeman here, a policeman by the name of James Moffett, a patrolman who knows the habits of homosexuals pretty well, has been in his off hours going to the plaza in plain clothes, has been able to single them out one at a time, homosexuals, careful not to have any witnesses to his doings, and he flashes his badge after he has made leading proposals and asks the victim to empty their pockets while holding his gun on them. After the victim has emptied their pocket, he takes their billfold in his hands in the pretext of looking for damaging evidence such as obscene pictures or pornographic literature. He takes whatever amount of money they have in their billfold. He then returns their billfold and lets the victim go, telling them not to come back to the Plaza Park. So here's an example of some clandestine police efforts to thwart this movement and thwart a homosexual hotspot in the city of Indianapolis at the time. And essentially the judicial collaboration with the police department in this effort, that the police department and Judge Norris are backing him, supporting him in his actions. We do believe the police department knows of this action, and that the police who do not approve probably are afraid to protect the unlawful protest, rather the unlawful action for fear of being associated with the homosexuals. So pretty self-explanatory, in my opinion, quite noteworthy and notable. And as you can see here on the last page, they signed Leslie M. And we've redacted their last name for security and privacy purposes. And also, as you looked on the first page, we have also blacked out the address. So we redact the address of origin, and we redact the creator's last name for security and privacy purposes. So that's one example of a noteworthy record that I've found. And I'll show you just briefly this particular record on the spreadsheet. So I will look up Leslie M. One moment, please. So here I have found, this is what I've written in the description. Leslie M. letter in response to a recent shooting highlights the illegal actions of local policemen holding homosexuals at gunpoint at a local homosexual hangout, looking for incriminating evidence. So here the LCSH subjects that I've input here: police corruption, homosexuality, and gay press publications. And the corporate name, no real corporate names are really mentioned aside from the general one Inc. And then we have here Indianapolis, city of Indianapolis in Marion County, state of Indiana, country, United States. And here we have the creator, the redacted name, Leslie M. There's no contributor, there's nobody replied. If an editor had replied to them, then this is where we would put that name, the contributor's name. And then the date and the format, lastly. And so there's one more record that I wanted to show that I thought was very, very interesting. I'm showing the unredacted name because this particular person, Del Martin, is the co-founder and president of Daughters of Bilitis in San Francisco, California, which was the first lesbian-focused group in San Francisco. And essentially why I think it's noteworthy is because this shows William Lambert, or W. Dorleg, that I mentioned before, the editor of the first homophile publication, in correspondence with the president and co-founder of the first lesbian organization, and showing this kind of showing this collaboration and showing this back and forth friendly, if you want to call it, correspondence in 1956. So quickly, I'll just go through this letter and show what is discussed. Dear Bill, sorry for the delay. They talk about various places that they went to on vacation. So it's kind of a friendly, cordial correspondence, right? However, she did write an analysis of a conference called NACHO, which was the North American Conference of Homophile Organizations. And this was essentially a gathering of many, if not all, homophile organizations in the United States. And she writes in criticism of this particular conference. And I want to show you a quick quote that kind of just shows exactly what she's talking about here. So yeah. Oh yes, when 6 of my sisters from the Daughters of Bilitis, Nova, and Gay Women's Liberation stood with me to confront the Nacho meeting on August 26th, the day of the National Women's Strike, about the relevance of the homophile movement to the women within it, delegates passed a resolution in support of the women's liberation movement. She speaks rather bleakly about this conference and the overwhelming focus on the male homophile movement, and she talks about how women and children have been essentially separated from the homophile movement, even though women and children do have a very important part in the homophile movement. Also, there's a quick quote that I wanted to show. She's rather scathing in her criticism, which is very, very interesting. But which also shows, during this time, during this gay liberation movement, there was a lot of misunderstanding. There was a lot of argumentation on where the movement was going, and debate, etc. So she talks about gay bars that discriminate against women. She talks about goodbye to the male homophile community. Gay is good, but not good enough, so long as it is limited to white males only. We joined with you in what we mistakenly thought was a common cause. A few of you tried, we admit, but you are still too few, and even you fall short of the mark. You too are victims of our culture. 15 years of masochism is enough. So she's essentially just saying, she's criticizing the fact that the homophile movement is too male dominant and needs to be inclusive of the others in the homophile movement, women and children. So that's a little bit about a couple of really interesting and noteworthy records that I've worked with thus far, and a little bit about the metadata input and the particular spreadsheet that I use to input all of this data. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.